Welcome to Football Game Plan's College Football Kickoff Show. I am Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook, and it's already week 6 in the college football season. And as we always like to start this show off with our gut check, let's take a look at some of the teams that really have to dig deep and find their way out of a tough situation. The Auburn Tigers were flat out embarrassed last weekend between the hedges at Georgia. This was an offensive line that got manhandled up front and a defensive line that could not gain any traction in slowing down the Bulldogs' ground game. We saw them have some trouble in the opener against Kentucky in that regard, and it just continued against Georgia. This week they face an Arkansas team that is coming off of an impressive win against Mississippi State, and if the Tigers enter this game with the same problems along the line of scrimmage without a sign of significant improvement, it could be problems. Oklahoma finds themselves with 2 losses already on the season and unranked for the first time in a long time, it seems. Quarterback Spencer Rattler has been a bit up and down to start the season, and the defense can't seem to slow down the run game from opponents. Needless to say that in this unique, shortened season, there's little room for another slip-up by Oklahoma, as they could find themselves completely out of the Big 12 race by the close of business on Saturday if things don't turn around quickly. Ole Miss has given up 600 yards rushing on the ground already this season in only 2 games. That's an insane number, and it's indicative of why the Rebels' games have gone the way they have so far this season. Yes, they got a win against Kentucky in overtime, but they needed a little bit of luck for that to happen. They'll have to dig deep and quickly get better, because if Alabama can lean on an opponent and run the football, they'll do that all game long. How about the Navy midshipmen needing another gut check? This is the second time this year they've been blown out in the ballgame, and if it wasn't for an amazing comeback against Tulane, it would have been 3 straight blowouts. Now, we know the circumstances have been a bit tough and difficult for the Mids this year, and we know head coach Ken Niumatalolo is one of the top 10 best coaches in the game, but this year's group has to be able to overcome those obvious obstacles and get back to playing the midshipman style of football that we've seen from them this past decade. And their road to redemption starts this weekend against the Temple Owls. And we're reaching the midway point of the season, or getting close to it, so it's now time to start to talk about the Heisman Trophy a little bit more seriously as we take a look at our candidates for Week 6. Let's start with Oklahoma State running back Chuba Hubbard, who has posted back-to-back 100-yard games and is starting to regain that game-breaking form that we saw from him last season. His yards per carry has jumped from 3.4 to 4.6 to 7.3 last weekend, and if he can continue to stay on this track as the Pokes get into the meat of their schedule and the games start to become much more significant, staring the Big 12 title and the college football playoffs in the face, we'll see Mr. Hubbard run himself all the way from Stillwater to New York City. Kyle Pitts of Florida is tied for first in the country with 6 receiving touchdowns, which is unheard of for a tight end. It's not just the fact that he's catching a lot of touchdowns, it's the spectacular way in which he's doing so. Pitts has already racked up a bevy of Heisman-worthy highlights and figures to create even more memorable moments as the Gators offense looks to be one of the best in college football. Hey, 2020 has already been a weird year enough, and it could get even weirder as Pitts could become a Heisman finalist at the position for the first time since 1977 when Ken McAfee did it out of Notre Dame. He finished 3rd, and a winner since Leon Hart, also out of Notre Dame, won the award back in 1949. Miami's quarterback Derek King has gotten off to a great start to the season on both ends of offense. King has thrown 6 touchdown passes, no interceptions, and has nearly 200 yards rushing already this season. I think he has a legitimate chance this weekend against Clemson to truly kick off his campaign with a signature win over a Tigers team that enters this game with arguably the best team in the country and the presumptive #1 overall pick at quarterback and fellow Heisman Trophy contender in Trevor Lawrence. King's decision to head to Miami this year has proven to be a very wise one for both he and the Canes. BYU is home to the most exciting player in college football this season in quarterback Zach Wilson. He is worth the price of admission as well as the price of staying up late to watch him play. Wilson is completing 84% of his passes at an impressive 13.4 yards an attempt. He's able to extend plays with his legs and has 5 rushing touchdowns so far this season. There are no shortage of highlight plays to warrant this attention, and with the way the Cougars offense has blown out its opponents this year, he may have the amount of victories as well. But right now, still at number one in my opinion is Clemson's quarterback Trevor Lawrence. Like I've said before, he is the Peyton Manning of this Heisman race and is driving the pace car at a steady pace, making just enough wild throws a game to warrant his place atop this list. And just like with De'Ara King, this upcoming game against Miami will be a big one for him and his candidacy moving forward. I like to call this the eye test power rankings as we dive right into our top 15 power poll for week 6. I have the Marshall Thundering Herd at number 15. Grant Wells, their freshman quarterback, and running back Brendan Knox lead an offense that's well balanced and does a good job of generating chunk plays. Marshall is also playing really good defense, only giving up 3.5 points per game. Now, with all of the chaos surrounding that Virginia Tech program with COVID-19, the Hokies had their issues in getting a good number of healthy bodies to get out there and play. What makes their 2-0 start to the season that much more impressive is because of that. So expect them to get significantly better as the season rolls along. SMU can score, and they can score some more. Their offense is one of the best in the country, and we'll see if that can still be the case without star wide receiver Reggie Robinson, who tore his ACL last weekend. The Louisiana Ragin Cajuns have gotten off to their best start since 1988 and have a huge challenge this weekend against the Coastal Carolina team, who is also off to an impressive 3-1 start to the season. So we'll see if the week off benefits the Cajuns and their offense that has sputtered coming out of the gate early in games. North Carolina's offense seems to sputter at times during games, but I think it's been a Tar Heels defense that has been the biggest story for me. They've done a really good job in getting off the field and making plays on both ends of defense. Oklahoma State has a star running back in Chuba Hubbard and a defense that is playing some really good football. And looking around the Big 12, the Pokes may have what it takes to win the conference outright this season. I really like the Cincinnati Bearcats and how they're playing this year. The way they handled that potent triple option attack of our Army was the best anyone has done that I've seen in the last 3 seasons. Quarterback Desmond Ridder has his offense trucking in the right direction. Run game and defense will still win you games, especially in the SEC, and that's what the Tennessee Volunteers have done so far in their 2-0 start. The run game is clicking, and quarterback Jaron Garantano has played efficient enough ball to help keep this offense on schedule. Now, Florida's offense looks to be one of the best in the country, with tight end Kyle Pitts putting himself in the Heisman Trophy conversation. If the Gators want to continue to climb, their defense will have to start to close out games a lot sooner moving forward. Now, don't look now, but the BYU Cougars offense is explosive and their defense can beat you up in the trenches, and they match up well out on the perimeter. They've been one of the more well-rounded teams so far in college football. So has Notre Dame, who can really dominate opponents on both sides of the line of scrimmage. The Irish they have another big game this week against Florida State, who will be looking to pull off the upset. The Georgia Bulldogs look like bullies on the block in the SEC East behind Zamir White's running and safety Richard LeCounte's ability to take the ball away. Georgia steamrolling opponents on both sides of the ball this year. Miami's ability to run and play defense is very similar to that of Georgia, but where they differ is at quarterback, as De'Ara King is a Heisman candidate and his play has the Canes eyeing a playoff berth. But standing in their way are the Clemson Tigers, who they faced this weekend. The Tigers are armed with the best quarterback in the country in Trevor Lawrence and a host of explosive weapons on the perimeter. Do they have a championship defense, though, is the biggest question. We know Alabama does, and they look to have a championship offense as well. It only took 2 games of the season for them for it to be clear that the Crimson Tide is the best team in college football this season. Be sure to order your copy of the Go-Go Offense by Coach Brennan Marion on footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense. Coach Marion goes through the ins and outs of his explosive offense, one that's tearing up the college football field and putting a lot of points on the scoreboard. Again, you can order your copy at footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense. Let's kick off some game previews here, and we'll start in the ACC as Virginia Tech takes on the North Carolina Tar Heels. It's still tough to figure out how Virginia Tech is going about their business and being able to win football games. They find themselves 2-0 and face a very good North Carolina football team. Khalil Herbert is coming off an impressive game where he ran for over 200 yards. But in this matchup, the biggest thing I will be looking for is for North Carolina's offense and how well they can get off to a great start. We know their offense has the firepower to really put points up on the board, but they've sputtered out of the gate in their 2 games. You're talking about a game versus Syracuse, and you're talking about last week versus Boston College. But defensively, I'm a big fan of Chad Surratt and what he does going sideline to sideline, especially versus the run, as well as what he can do in coverage. I like North Carolina in this game on the strength of their defense, giving them time for their offense to get into gear. Mercer kicks off its college football season by taking on Jacksonville State. Now, the Mercer Bears do a good job of coming out and try to spread the field and work all of their targets out on the perimeter, which then opens them up to be able to run the football later on in games to close out opponents. But in this matchup, they're going to face a Jacksonville State team that has one of the better quarterbacks in the FCS, and that's Zerrick Cooper. They're coming off of a tough loss to Florida State where they had an opportunity to win that ball game. I think they get right back on the winning track by knocking off the Mercer Bears. If you love option football, you're going to get a lot of it in this game between the Citadel and Army. When you look at the Citadel on defense, Willie Eubanks is one of the best linebackers in the FCS, and having that experience and going up against his own offense in practice should put him in play to make a lot of plays against the Black Knights. When you look at Army, they're coming off of a game where they had an opportunity to really put a stranglehold on that top 25 spot. They lost to Cincinnati, but they do get right back on the winning track, I believe, in this matchup against the Citadel. I just think Army's offense is just too explosive for the Bulldogs to handle. I like this matchup here between Texas State and Troy, Sun Belt Conference. I think this is an underrated matchup on the schedule. Why? Because Texas State, in my opinion, should be undefeated on the season. They could have beaten Boston College last weekend, but you look at Jeremiah Haydell, the outstanding wide receiver, going up against probably one of the better corners in the Sun Belt Conference, and Terrence Dunlap. I think that's going to be the matchup that you'll have to watch for in this ballgame. Texas State loves to work touchdown to check down. They love to test the deep coverage of an opponent's secondary. They're going to work that perimeter really well, especially inside the red zone with their bigger targets at wide receiver. Troy is a very solid football team. Forget the BYU game. I think that is not indicative of what type of team this is, so we'll see a close one, but I do like Texas State to get their second win in conference play. UTEP taking on Louisiana Tech, and I've been impressed with the UTEP Miners so far this season. They are 3-1, and yes, I know 2 of those victories are against FCS opponents, but they got a really good win last weekend against an FBS opponent. And I think because of that confidence that they've built so far in their first 4 games after their embarrassing loss to Texas, it puts them right in play here for an upset victory against Louisiana Tech. We know the Bulldogs defense hasn't been good all season long, but why I like Louisiana Tech is because their offense, I believe, can score the ball at a high rate, more so than I believe UTEP can do so if it came down to an offense versus offense battle. So it'll be a tight game, but I do like Louisiana Tech to get the victory. Marshall is one of the more impressive Group of 5 football teams in the country, and they take on the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. Defensively, that's going to be the focus, in my opinion, for the Marshall Thundering Herd. Devontae Beckett is one of the best linebackers we've seen in college football, definitely one of the best backers in Conference USA. How well can he keep Gage Walker in that run game of Western Kentucky in check and make that offense one-dimensional will ultimately determine who wins this ball game. And if you're looking at that from that perspective, we've seen Marshall do this before against Appalachian State. I think they'll do it again against the Hilltoppers. Football Game Plan is brought to you in part by Ninth and Lux. Visit the website ninethandlux.com and check out the clothing gallery. Do You Music with featured artist IW in his latest album, Season 2. You can check that out on iTunes as well as doyoumusic.com. Nesby Phipps, art, life, entertainment. NesbyPhipps.com. Grind It Out Fitness. Visit the website grinditoutfitness.com and download the app. There are some key matchups this week on the Week 6 schedule in college football, and I want to take a look at some of the big ones that you want to keep an eye on this upcoming Saturday. In the Tennessee-Georgia game, one of the bigger matchups I'll be interested in watching will be between quarterback Jared Garantano, who's gotten off to a solid start this season, and Georgia's ball-hawking safety Richard LeCounte. Now, the reason being is that Tennessee wants to come in and lean on their sensational tailbacks Eric Gray and Ty Chandler behind a strong offensive line led by NFL prospect at guard Trey Smith, and they feel as though they match up well with the Bulldogs at the point of attack. And I'm sure Georgia feels the same way about their defensive line and their linebackers. So that's why, for me, it'll come down to Garantano having to make plays in a passing game in order for them to win, which puts the focus on LeCounte, who does a fantastic job of reading route concepts and anticipating throws by the quarterback, putting himself in position to make plays on the ball. So how both of these guys are able to outclass each other will ultimately determine the outcome of the game. Over in the Florida-Texas A&M game, no one so far this season has been able to stop or even slow down tight end Kyle Pitts, which is why I'm interested to see how the Aggies match up against him with their safeties in strong safety Damani Richardson and free safety Leon O'Neal Jr. because they can't put a linebacker out there on him, right? Maybe they'll try to do some sort of banjo coverage with a linebacker and one of these safeties, but whatever they do, it has to work. At best, you want to take away one of the two excellent options that quarterback Kyle Trask has to throw the football to and make him a bit one-handed in the passing game, and how they game plan against Pitts will be what I'll be watching for this upcoming weekend. And here's an off-the-radar game for Week 6, one with a lot of intrigue in my opinion, and that's UL Monroe taking on Liberty. The Warhawks defense has an excellent defensive end in Ty Shelby, who leads them up front. His challenge this week is trying to strike the right balance of push versus pressure against one of the more talented quarterbacks in the country, in Malik Willis out of Liberty. The Warhawks can't allow him to break contain, otherwise he can really pick him up and put him down, and he also has the ability to throw the football accurately on the move at all levels of the field. So if UL Monroe is going to pull off the upset, how they handle the point of attack will be key and is of the utmost importance. We'll take a quick break and be back with more Football Game Plan's College Football Kickoff.
Well, the game of football has taught me so many things, man. Now, think about the huddle we have right now, right? I tell people this all the time. There's a reason why they call it a huddle. You know, people have been huddling all their lives, trying to find ways to enhance each other's lives. The great teams do that all the time. The great teams do that. The better the huddle, the better the team. And so it's simple, man, how if you huddle for all the right reasons, we wouldn't have Ferguson. We wouldn't have some of the challenges that we have in our society. But as we all know, there's always a moment when somebody doesn't belong in the huddle. And yet we have to continue to move on. We got to continue to play. So the game of life, man, is always starting with the huddle. And for me, I'm lucky enough to know that, you know, by the graces of God, man, it's been a nice huddle. It's been a nice huddle. And if I just keep making sure that he's in front of me, I'm gonna be all right.
Financial Coaching LLC, investment, retirement, security. Stewardship Credit. Financial growth is in your hands. StewardshipCredit.com. Adrienne Marie Photo, photographer, writer, management. AdrienneMariePhotography.com. Lock Multimedia. Let's dive into some more game previews for the weekend, and we'll start out in Provo, Utah, where UTSA travels to take on BYU. Now, the Roadrunners have one of the best running backs in college football in their sophomore tailback, Sincere McCormick, who leads the nation in rushing, and they're going to need to lean on him a lot because it's going to be tough to move the football against BYU with their defensive front. And defensively, I don't think they have enough to slow down Zach Wilson in that passing game. So they're going to need McCormick to really set the tempo, set the pace, and shrink that ball game. I don't think it'll happen. I'm rolling with BYU. Pitt takes on Boston College in the old school Big East matchup, but in this ball game, it's going to be offense versus defense. I look at Pitt's quarterback, Kenny Pickett, one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch in college football. I think they do a great job of working the intermediate level of the field, but their run game really has to step up and show itself against a Boston College team that can really apply pressure. But on the other side of the ball, I struggle to see where Boston College's offense will challenge Pitt enough, especially with those two safeties back there in DeMar Hamlin and Paris Ford. I like Pitt to get the win. It'll be interesting, it'll be sloppy, but I do think the Panthers can pull off the win. It's the Red River rivalry between Texas and Oklahoma, but this year's game just doesn't have the same feel or luster around it because, one, both teams come in limping into this ball game, and Texas's offense really has to find a way to find that consistency that we saw earlier in the year. They struggled against TCU, and their defense hasn't looked good at all, maybe going all the way back to that UTEP game, but their defense has a chance to get right against Oklahoma because they're facing Spencer Rattler, and while he's talented, he's showing some freshman lumps having a bit up and down performance, but their defense, as we mentioned earlier in the show, has issues in stopping the run. So I see this as a tightly contested game, and I'm just going to lean on the experience of Sam Ehlinger to get Texas the victory. Florida State takes on Notre Dame in a game that Florida State, I believe, must win if they want to get their program back on the right track. One guy that will bring his A game, and that's Asante Samuel Jr., because it seems like every game he comes up with an interception. He leads the nation with 3 picks so far this year, but it's going to be about their run defense and whether or not they can stop Kyron Williams and Notre Dame behind that big offensive line, arguably the best offensive line in the country. It's a tall task because that Irish offense can really shrink a ball game. They put points up on the board, and I can't trust Florida State's offense to match that level of consistency that we'll see from the Fighting Irish, so I'm taking Notre Dame to knock off the Seminoles. Alabama takes on Ole Miss, and Nick Saban takes on his former protege in Lane Kiffin, but this game to me will be about Najee Harris, the Alabama offensive line, taking advantage of an Ole Miss defensive front that has given up 600 yards rushing in the last 2 games. There are only 2 games of the season, so that's the main focus. The other focus will be how many explosive plays will we see from Ole Miss. Now, I would expect there to be some weather there, as the whole Southeast is probably dealing with Hurricane Delta, but with all of that aside, we know Lane Kiffin knows how to attack that Saban defense, having been a part of that staff and knowing Saban's defense very intricately. However, it's going to come down to whether or not Ole Miss can stop the run. That's something I don't think they can do so, at least with some level of consistency enough to win this game. I'm taking Alabama. And now it's time for our Game of the Week preview between the Miami Hurricanes and Clemson Tigers. Offensively speaking for the Hurricanes, a lot of it will be about D'Eriq King and what he can do as a dual threat player. We saw Bryson Armstrong give that Clemson Tiger defense some issues last week in their game against Virginia, but D'Eriq King is a different animal. He's a guy that's a Heisman candidate. He's one that can make plays with his arm as well as with his legs. And we know Miami wants to come in and run the football. And if they can have that balance because they have the +1 at the QB position, it gives them a great chance to keep that Clemson defense guessing and also having some issues. The question will be whether or not King can hit plays consistently deeper downfield in the passing game. Now, on the defensive side for Miami, I think not enough attention has been given to both Quincy Roche and Jalen Phillips and what they do up front as far as collapsing the pocket and really condensing the pocket, forcing a quarterback to stay within that tackle-to-tackle box. And that's going to be key because when you look at what Trevor Lawrence does well, he's a guy that is a very good athlete that can escape and make plays with his legs, but also does a good job in the pocket. But they are having an opportunity to get pressure on him in this game. Now, also defensively, how well can those linebackers really play gap sound defense against a guy in Travis Etienne as we transition over to the Clemson offense, because Etienne has looked even more impressive this year. We are seeing him utilize a little bit more wiggle in his game so he can make a guy miss, and we know he has the home run hitting speed to really take it the distance. So I'm going to be watching how that matchup between the Clemson run game and the linebacking core of Miami plays out throughout the course of this matchup, and Baylon Spector, the linebacker of Clemson, and how he does, keeping an eye on D'Eriq King, because again, you can't allow a guy like King to really utilize his dual threat talent. So he's going to have to take one of those away, whether he's going to be great versus the run or he's going to be a very good underneath defender in coverage. So I think Baylon Spector and what he does defensively could determine what they do ultimately overall. But in the end, I do like the discipline and consistency of Clemson. I think that's going to be the biggest key. This game will be sloppy. It'll be back and forth. They'll have some crazy plays on both sides, but what team can you trust to maintain that level of focus? I think Clemson is that team. They've done it before. I look for them to win in a close game against Miami. So that's it for this week's edition of Football Game Plan's College Football Kickoff. I am Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Be sure to follow me on all of my social media accounts, and don't forget to check out and subscribe to the Football Game Plan Network located at youtube.com/footballgameplan. Also, check out and subscribe Football Game Plan podcast on iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating.